In 1922, in a quiet village on the coast of Japan, a boy was born into a family that knew war. His name was Hiroo Onoda. His father had been a soldier, his grandfather before him. From the time he could walk, he understood one thing above all others. Duty was not a choice, it was a birthright. When Japan went to war with America in 1941, Hiroo Onoda did not hesitate. At 18 years old, he walked into a recruitment office and signed his life to the Imperial Army. But Onoda was not like the other recruits. The military saw something in him, a mind as sharp as his will, and so they sent him somewhere most soldiers never went. The Nakano School was not an ordinary military academy. It was where Japan trained its most dangerous minds: guerrilla warfare, covert operations, psychological resistance, and one rule above all others, carved into every graduate like scripture: you do not surrender, not ever. You fight until your commanding officer personally tells you to stop. No one else, only him. In December 1944, Lieutenant Hiroo Onoda received his orders. He was to travel to a small island in the Philippines called Lubang and wage guerrilla war against the enemy. Before he boarded the ship, his commanding officer, Major Taniguchi, looked him in the eyes and said, "It may take 3 years, it may take 5, but whatever happens, we will come back for you." It would take 29 years. When American forces landed on Lubang Island in February 1945, the Japanese defense collapsed within days. Most soldiers were captured or killed. But Onoda did exactly what his training had prepared him for. He ran deeper into the jungle. 4 men, dense tropical wilderness, no radio, no orders, just the mission and the belief that their country would come for them. On August 15, 1945, the war ended. Japan surrendered unconditionally. Across the Pacific, soldiers wept and laid down their weapons. Cities began to rebuild. The world exhaled. And on Lubang Island, leaflets rained down from Allied aircraft through the jungle canopy. They read, "The war is over. Come out. Surrender." Onoda read those words and decided they were a lie, a trick, enemy propaganda designed to flush him out. His training had warned him about exactly this. They built shelters from palm leaves and bamboo. They ate wild fruit, coconuts, and whatever they could find or take. They moved constantly, never sleeping in the same place twice. The monsoons came and went and came again. Tropical disease, perpetual dampness, the deep, crushing silence of isolation. And yet, every single night, Onoda cleaned his rifle, oiled every moving part, kept it ready, because in his mind, the war was still on.
While Onoda crouched in the jungle, the world outside was moving at a speed he could not have imagined. Japan rose from the ashes of defeat and became an economic miracle. The Korean War was fought and ended. In 1969, humanity walked on the moon. Entire generations were born, grew up and grew old. Cities of glass and steel replaced the ruins of war. And in the Philippine jungle, one man continued his patrol, rifle ready, waiting. In 1974, a young Japanese college student named Norio Suzuki made a peculiar list. He wanted to find a wild panda, the abominable snowman, and Hiroo Onoda. Armed with little more than determination, he traveled to Lubang Island, walked into the jungle, and found him. He told Onoda the truth. The war was over. Japan was at peace. It was time to come home. Onoda listened to every word and refused. He would not leave, he said, until Major Taniguchi personally came to relieve him of his post.
Suzuki returned to Japan and found Major Taniguchi, now an old man long retired from the military, working quietly as a bookseller. Taniguchi agreed to go back. On March 9, 1974, he walked into the jungle of Lubang Island one final time. He stood before Hiroo Onoda and officially relieved him of his duty. The war, he said, was over. It had been over for 29 years. Onoda later said it was the most devastating moment of his life. Not the jungle, the realization that it had all been for nothing. He walked out of the jungle in his original uniform, worn but maintained with almost obsessive care for nearly 3 decades. He carried his Arisaka rifle, 500 rounds of ammunition, several hand grenades, and his military sword. He had kept them all ready. The Filipino soldiers and press photographers who waited at the tree line watched in absolute silence. Here was a ghost stepping out of a war that no longer existed, blinking in the light of a world he did not recognize. 2 days later, on March 11, 1974, Hiroo Onoda formally surrendered his sword to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos at the Malacanang Palace in Manila. He was one of the last soldiers of World War II to lay down his arms. President Marcos, moved by the extraordinary weight of the moment, officially pardoned Onoda for all acts committed during his 30 years of guerrilla warfare. A war that had been over since 1945 finally ended for one man in 1974. When Onoda landed in Japan, hundreds of people were waiting for him. Reporters, citizens, families, all crowding the airport to see the man who had refused to stop. Japan called him a hero. But Onoda walked through the crowd like a man from another century. Because he was. The Japan he had fought for, the Japan of absolute loyalty, of the emperor's divine will, of death before dishonor, no longer existed. He had returned to a country he did not know. Hiroo Onoda spent the rest of his life between 2 worlds, the Japan he remembered and the Japan that had moved on without him. He moved to Brazil, built a cattle farm, eventually returned to Japan to run a nature school for children, teaching them the same discipline and resilience that had kept him alive in the jungle for 3 decades. He never truly apologized for what happened on Lubang Island. He believed until the end that he had simply done his duty. Hiroo Onoda died on January 16th, 2014. He was 91 years old. His story doesn't ask us to judge him. It asks us something far more uncomfortable. How much of what you believe was something you chose? And how much was something you are simply trained to think?